The tears wouldn't stop flowing down Pearl O'Malley's face as she knelt on the freshly turned soil of her father's grave, the Wyoming wind whipping strands of auburn hair across her pale cheeks. The year was 1875, and at 20 years old, she found herself completely alone in the world, abandoned by everyone, even the man who had promised to stand by her side on this terrible day. "Papa," she whispered, her voice cracking as she traced the crude wooden marker. "What am I supposed to do now?" The small churchyard of Clearwater Creek offered no answers, only the mournful sound of wind through the cottonwoods and the distant toll of the church bell signaling the end of the day's services. The other mourners had long since departed. Even Reverend Johnson had excused himself after offering perfunctory condolences, leaving Pearl to her grief as the afternoon shadows lengthened across the yard. Her fiancé, Thomas Wilson, had promised to attend the funeral, but like so many of his promises, this one had proven empty. The truth was becoming painfully clear with her father gone, and the small ranch they'd worked together likely to be claimed by creditors. Thomas's interest in marriage had evaporated. Pearl clutched the locket around her neck, the only keepsake she had of her mother who had died when she was just a child. With her father now gone too, she had no one left. The small amount of money she had wouldn't last more than a few days at the boarding house. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the churchyard in a golden glow that seemed to mock her despair. She hadn't noticed the approaching footsteps until a shadow fell across her father's grave. "Miss, pardon me, miss, but the evening's coming on fast. It ain't safe for a lady to be out here alone after dark." Pearl looked up through tear-blurred eyes to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. As he shifted, she could make out his features, a young man, perhaps 25, with sun-weathered skin and kind eyes that seemed out of place beneath the brim of his dusty cowboy hat. His clothes were trail-worn but clean, marking him as a working man rather than one of the town's more prosperous citizens. "I have nowhere to go," she admitted, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. The stranger knelt down to her level, respectfully keeping some distance. "My name's Samuel Zimmerman. Most folks call me Sam. I work at the Double Cross Ranch just north of town." He gestured to the grave. "Was he family, my father?" Pearl said, her voice barely audible. "The last family I had," Sam nodded solemnly. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss, miss." "Pearl," she offered. "Pearl O'Malley." "Miss O'Malley," he amended with a slight nod. "Night's falling fast, and this town has its share of unsavory characters after dark. Allow me to escort you somewhere safe, perhaps to a friend's home." Pearl wiped her tears with the back of her hand. "I have no friends here, not really. My father and I kept to ourselves at our small ranch outside of town, and now—" She gestured helplessly. "The bank will take it soon enough." Sam considered this for a moment, then stood and offered his hand. "My Aunt Martha runs a respectable boarding house on Sycamore Street. She sometimes needs help with cooking and cleaning. It ain't much, but it might give you a place to stay until you sort things out." Pearl hesitated, studying his face for any sign of deception. In her 20 years, she'd learned that offers of help often came with hidden costs, but there was something in Sam's steady gaze that spoke of genuine concern rather than ulterior motives. "Why would you help a stranger?" she asked. A sad smile touched his lips. "I buried my ma when I was 14. Pa a year later. I know what it's like to stand at a grave with nowhere to turn." He kept his hand extended. "I ain't asking nothing of you except to let me make sure you're safe for the night." Pearl looked once more at her father's grave, whispering a silent goodbye. Then, with a deep breath, she placed her hand in Sam's and allowed him to help her to her feet. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman," she said, her voice steadier than before. "Just Sam, please," he replied, leading her toward the churchyard gate where a chestnut mare was tethered. "Let's get you somewhere warm before the night chill sets in." As they walked, Pearl felt a curious mixture of grief and relief. The pain of her father's death remained a raw wound, but for the first time that day, she didn't feel completely alone. She couldn't have known then that this simple act of kindness from a stranger would be the first step on a journey that would change both their lives forever. Sam helped Pearl onto his horse, then mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance as they rode through the darkening streets of Clearwater Creek. The boarding house on Sycamore Street was a two-story structure with a wide porch and windows glowing with lamplight. When they arrived, an older woman with gray streaked hair pulled into a tight bun opened the door. "Samuel Zimmerman, what brings you to town at this hour? And who is this young lady?" Her tone was stern but not unkind as her eyes moved from her nephew to Pearl. "Aunt Martha, this is Miss Pearl O'Malley. She's just lost her father and needs a place to stay. I thought perhaps you might have a room and maybe some work for her." Martha's expression softened as she took in Pearl's tear-stained face and somber black dress. "Come in, child. You look half frozen." The next few days passed in a blur for Pearl. Martha Zimmerman proved to be a fair employer, offering Pearl a small room in exchange for help with cooking, cleaning, and looking after the handful of boarders who occupied the house. Most were traveling salesmen or railroad men passing through, though there were 2 permanent residents. A retired schoolteacher named Miss Abigail and a clerk from the general store named Mr. Peterson. Pearl threw herself into the work, finding that physical labor helped distract from the hollow ache in her chest. She rose before dawn to help Martha prepare breakfast, spent the mornings cleaning, the afternoons doing laundry or mending, and the evenings serving dinner and washing dishes. By the time she fell into bed each night, she was too exhausted to think about all she had lost. A week after the funeral, Sam returned to the boarding house. Pearl was in the kitchen kneading dough for the next morning's bread when Martha called her to the front parlor. "Miss O'Malley," Sam greeted her, removing his hat. "I trust you're settling in all right," Pearl nodded, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "Your aunt has been very kind. She can be tough as rawhide, but her heart's in the right place," Sam said with obvious affection. "I came by because I heard some news that might interest you. The bank's putting your father's ranch up for auction next month." Pearl's chest tightened. "I suspected as much. Thing is," Sam continued, "I also heard that Thomas Wilson has been talking about buying it cheap. Claims he has some prior arrangement with your father." At the mention of Thomas's name, Pearl's face flushed with anger. "That's a lie. My father would never have made any arrangement with Thomas without telling me. Besides, Thomas hasn't even had the decency to call on me since Papa died." Sam's expression darkened. "I thought as much. Wilson has a reputation for taking advantage of situations like this." "There's nothing I can do," Pearl said, her voice hollow. "I don't have the money to pay off Papa's debts." "Maybe there is something," Sam said hesitantly. "I've been saving for a place of my own for some time now. Not enough to buy outright, but maybe enough to cover the debts and make a down payment. With my wages from the Double Cross and whatever income the ranch could generate." Pearl stared at him in confusion. "Why would you do that?" Sam shifted uncomfortably. "I'm not suggesting I buy it for myself, more like a partnership. You know the land better than anyone, and I've got experience with cattle. Together we might be able to make it work." "A partnership," Pearl repeated. "Mr. Zimmerman, we barely know each other." "I know," he acknowledged. "And I ain't suggesting anything improper. You'd keep the house, I'd bunk in the old foreman's cabin. We'd run it as a business arrangement, nothing more." Pearl studied his face, searching for any sign of deception. "Why would you help me this way?" Sam looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "My pa always said a man should stand up for what's right. What Wilson's trying to do ain't right. Besides," he added with a small smile, "I've been wanting my own spread for years. This might be my only chance." Pearl glanced at Martha, who had been listening silently from her rocking chair. "If you're asking for my opinion," Martha said, "Samuel's a good man, works harder than most and keeps his word. But it's your decision, Miss O'Malley." Pearl turned back to Sam. "Let me think about it. This isn't something I can decide right away." "Of course," Sam agreed. "I'll be back in town on Saturday. We can talk more then." After Sam left, Pearl continued her chores mechanically, her mind racing. The idea of entering into a business arrangement with a man she barely knew seemed foolhardy at best. And yet, the thought of Thomas Wilson taking her family's land made her blood boil. By the time she finished her work that evening, she had made her decision. On Saturday, when Sam returned, Pearl was waiting for him on the boarding house porch. "I accept your offer, Mr. Zimmerman," she said before he could even dismount. "But I have conditions." Sam's eyebrows rose as he tied his horse to the hitching post. "I'm listening." "First, everything must be legal and proper. We'll have papers drawn up by the lawyer, Mr. Hodges, clearly stating that the ranch remains in my name." Sam nodded. "That's fair." "Second, this is strictly a business arrangement. I'll manage the household and the garden. You'll handle the cattle and most of the outside work. We'll split all profits equally after expenses." "Agreed." "Third," Pearl continued, "if at any point either of us wishes to dissolve the partnership, we'll sell the ranch and divide the proceeds according to our initial investments." Sam considered this for a moment. "Sounds reasonable, though I hope it won't come to that." "And finally," Pearl said, meeting his gaze directly, "no one in town can know the exact nature of our arrangement. People will talk enough as it is. Let them think what they will, but we'll know the truth." Sam extended his hand. "You drive a hard bargain, Miss O'Malley, but I accept your terms." As Pearl shook his hand, she couldn't help but wonder if she was making an enormous mistake, but the alternative, losing her home to Thomas Wilson, was unthinkable. At least this way, she had a fighting chance to keep what remained of her family's legacy. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Sam and Pearl met with Mr. Hodges to draw up their partnership agreement, then with the bank to negotiate terms for paying off her father's debts. When word got out that Pearl O'Malley was entering into a business arrangement with Samuel Zimmerman, the town buzzed with gossip. Some approved, seeing it as a practical solution for a young woman alone in the world. Others, particularly the more conservative church ladies, clucked their tongues at the impropriety. Thomas Wilson made his displeasure known one afternoon when he cornered Pearl outside the general store. "So it's true," he sneered, blocking her path. "You've taken up with that cowhand from the Double Cross." Pearl straightened her spine. "Mr. Zimmerman and I have a business arrangement, nothing more." Thomas laughed harshly. "That's not what people are saying. Your father would be ashamed." "My father," Pearl said, her voice ice-cold, "would be ashamed of a man who abandons his supposed fiancée at her darkest hour. Now, excuse me." She tried to step around him, but Thomas grabbed her arm. "You think you're so clever, don't you? That ranch should have been mine." "Your father as much as promised it to me." "Let go of me," Pearl demanded, trying to pull away. "Is there a problem here?" Sam's voice cut through the tension as he approached, his expression dangerously calm. Thomas released Pearl's arm but didn't back down. "This doesn't concern you, Zimmerman." "Anything that concerns my business partner concerns me," Sam replied evenly. "Miss O'Malley, are you ready to head back to the ranch?" Pearl nodded, moving to stand beside Sam. "This isn't over," Thomas warned, his gaze shifting between them. "Yes, it is," Sam said firmly. "Miss O'Malley has made her choice clear. I suggest you respect it." As they walked away, Pearl felt a mixture of gratitude and unease. "Thank you for intervening," she said quietly. "No need for thanks. Partners look out for each other." Sam helped her into the wagon before climbing up beside her. "Wilson's the type to hold a grudge. We should be careful around him." Pearl nodded, glancing back to see Thomas watching them with undisguised hatred. She couldn't help but wonder what trouble he might cause them in the future. The O'Malley Ranch, which Pearl had taken to calling Willow Creek for the trees that lined the small stream running through the property, was modest by Wyoming standards, 160 acres with a small herd of cattle, a sturdy log cabin that had been expanded over the years, a barn, corral, and the small foreman's cabin about 50 yards from the main house. When they arrived on moving day, Pearl felt a pang of both sadness and homecoming as she saw the familiar buildings. The ranch had fallen into disrepair during her father's illness and the weeks since his death, but it was still home. "We've got our work cut out for us," Sam observed as they surveyed the property. Pearl nodded. Papa always said ranching isn't for the faint of heart. Wise man, your father, Sam replied. Speaking of which, I brought something for you. He reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a small wooden box. Found this in town, thought you might like it for your father's things. Pearl accepted the box, touched by the thoughtful gesture. It was simple but beautifully crafted, with a small metal clasp and her father's initials, J.O., burned into the lid. It's lovely, she said softly. Thank you. Sam cleared his throat, seemingly embarrassed by her gratitude. Well, best get to unpacking, daylight's burning. The first month of their partnership was the hardest. There was so much to be done: fences to mend, cattle to round up and count, the house to clean, and the garden to resurrect from neglect. They worked from sunup to sundown, often too exhausted to do more than exchange a few words over dinner before retreating to their separate quarters. But slowly, the ranch began to take shape again. With each passing day, Pearl felt more confident in her decision. Sam proved to be everything he'd claimed: hardworking, honest, and respectful of the boundaries they'd established. He never entered the main house without knocking, took his meals at the kitchen table only when invited, and always treated Pearl with a courtesy that was refreshing after Thomas's possessiveness. As spring turned to summer, they fell into a comfortable routine. Pearl would rise early to prepare breakfast, which they would eat together while discussing the day's tasks. Then Sam would head out to work the cattle or repair fences, while Pearl tended to the house, garden, and chickens. They would meet again for a midday meal, sometimes eaten in the field if Sam was working far from the house, and then again for supper in the evening. It was during these quiet evening meals that they began to truly know each other. Pearl learned that Sam had been born in Pennsylvania and had come west with his parents when he was 10. After their deaths, he'd been taken in by his Aunt Martha, but had started working on ranches at 15 to ease the burden on her household. He'd been with the Double Cross for the past 7 years, working his way up from ranch hand to foreman before deciding to pursue his dream of owning his own spread. In turn, Pearl shared stories of her childhood, her mother's death when she was 8, the years it had been just her and her father working the land, her brief courtship with Thomas that had seemed promising until her father's illness revealed his true nature. I feel foolish now, she admitted one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sunset. Looking back, there were signs all along that Thomas wasn't what he appeared to be. Don't be too hard on yourself, Sam said. Some men are good at hiding their true character until it suits them to show it, Pearl sighed. I suppose, still, I should have known better. We all make mistakes, Sam offered. It's what we learn from them that matters. As he spoke, Pearl found herself studying his profile in the fading light, the strong line of his jaw, the way his eyes crinkled slightly at the corners when he smiled. She quickly looked away when he turned toward her, not wanting him to catch her staring. Getting late, she said, standing abruptly. I should head in. If Sam noticed her sudden discomfort, he didn't comment on it. Good night, Miss O'Malley. Sleep well. Good night, Mr. Zimmerman. As she closed the door behind her, Pearl leaned against it, her heart beating unexpectedly fast. This wouldn't do at all. Sam was her business partner, nothing more. She couldn't afford to complicate things with foolish romantic notions, not when their arrangement was working so well. But as the weeks passed, Pearl found it increasingly difficult to maintain the professional distance she'd insisted upon. There was something about Sam, his quiet strength, his unwavering integrity, the gentle way he had with animals that drew her to him despite her best efforts to resist. One afternoon in late July, a violent summer storm blew in without warning. Pearl was hanging laundry when the first drops fell, quickly turning into a downpour. She raced to gather the clothes, but the wind was already whipping them from the line. Suddenly, Sam was beside her, helping to collect the wayward garments as lightning cracked overhead. Come on, he shouted over the thunder, grabbing her hand and pulling her toward the house as hail began to pelt down around them. they burst through the door, soaked to the skin and breathless. Pearl's hair had come loose from its pins and hung in wet tangles around her face. Sam wasn't much better off, his shirt plastered to his chest, revealing the lean muscle beneath. For a moment, they stood dripping on the floor, looking at each other. Then, without warning, they both began to laugh, a release of tension that left them leaning against the wall for support. "Your face when that sheet nearly took flight," Sam gasped between chuckles. "You weren't much better," Pearl countered, "wrestling with my undergarments like they were wild mustangs." This set them off again, and it was several minutes before they regained their composure. "You should change before you catch cold," Sam said finally, still smiling but moving toward the door. "Wait," Pearl said, surprising herself. "You're soaked too. Let me at least give you a towel." She fetched a clean towel from the cupboard and handed it to him, their fingers brushing in the exchange. Something shifted in the air between them, a moment of awareness that neither was prepared to acknowledge. "Thank you," Sam said, his voice lower than usual. "You're welcome," Pearl replied, suddenly conscious of how close they were standing. The moment stretched, taut with unspoken possibilities, until a particularly loud crack of thunder broke the spell. "I should get back to my cabin," Sam said, stepping away. "See you at supper." Pearl nodded, unable to trust her voice. As the door closed behind him, she pressed her hands to her flushed cheeks. This was dangerous territory. They had an agreement, a business partnership that depended on maintaining proper boundaries. She couldn't risk jeopardizing everything they'd worked for because of some ridiculous infatuation. And yet, as she changed into dry clothes and set about preparing their evening meal, Pearl couldn't stop thinking about the way Sam had looked at her in that moment, as if seeing her for the first time. When he returned for supper, both of them acted as if nothing had happened, returning to their usual friendly but professional interactions. But something had changed, a subtle shift that neither could quite ignore. August brought the cattle drive to Cheyenne, where they would sell a portion of their herd to finance the ranch through the winter. Pearl had initially planned to stay behind, but Sam convinced her to come along. "It's your herd too," he pointed out. "You should be there for the sale, make sure we get a fair price." So Pearl found herself riding alongside Sam and the two hands they'd hired for the drive, spending nights under the stars and days in the saddle. It was hard work, but Pearl found she enjoyed the challenge. There was something freeing about being away from the ranch and the town's prying eyes, about being judged solely on her ability to do her share. In Cheyenne, they secured a good price for their cattle, enough to cover their expenses for the coming months with some left over. To celebrate, Sam suggested dinner at the hotel restaurant, a far cry from their usual simple meals at the ranch. Pearl wore her best dress, a deep blue calico that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair up in a style she hadn't attempted since before her father's death. When Sam saw her descending the hotel stairs, he stood speechless for a moment before recovering his composure. "You look lovely, Miss O'Malley," he said, offering his arm. "Thank you, Mr. Zimmerman," she replied, taking it. "You clean up rather well yourself," and he did. Sam had traded his usual work clothes for a clean white shirt, dark vest, and pressed trousers. His hair, usually hidden beneath his hat, was neatly combed, revealing a rich brown color with hints of gold where the lamplight caught it. The restaurant was crowded, but Sam had secured them a table near the window. As they ate, they discussed their plans for the ranch improvements they wanted to make, cattle they hoped to buy, crops they might plant. It was the same conversation they might have had at their kitchen table, but somehow in this setting, with candles flickering between them and the hum of other diners around them, it felt different, more intimate. "You know," Sam said as they finished their dessert, "you've surprised me, Miss O'Malley." Pearl raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "When we started this partnership, I figured you for a city girl playing at ranching, someone who'd tire of the hard work and long days." He smiled apologetically. "I was wrong. You're as tough as any rancher I've known, man or woman." Pearl felt a warmth that had nothing to do with the wine they'd shared, Thank you, that means a lot coming from you. I'm just being honest, Sam said, his gaze holding hers. You're remarkable. The word hung between them, charged with meaning beyond its simple definition. Pearl found herself unable to look away, caught in the intensity of Sam's eyes. The moment was broken by the arrival of their waiter with the bill. Sam paid, and they walked back to their hotel in a silence that was both comfortable and expectant, as if they were both waiting for something neither was quite ready to name. At Pearl's door, Sam hesitated. Well, good night, Miss O'Malley. We should head back to the ranch early tomorrow. Good night, Mr. Zimmerman, Pearl replied, feeling strangely disappointed. And it's Pearl. After all these months, I think you can call me Pearl. A slow smile spread across Sam's face. All right, Pearl, and I'm Sam. Good night, Sam, she said, testing the familiarity of his name on her tongue. Good night, Pearl, he responded, and for a heartbeat, she thought he might lean in closer. Instead, he tipped his hat and turned away, leaving her standing at her door with a curious mixture of relief and regret. The journey back to Willow Creek was quieter than the trip to Cheyenne had been. Something had shifted between them, creating a tension that was equal parts exciting and terrifying. Pearl found herself hyper-aware of Sam's presence, the sound of his voice, as he gave instructions to their hired hands. The way he moved in the saddle with easy confidence, the warmth of his smile when he caught her eye across the campfire. They arrived home to find the ranch untouched, exactly as they'd left it. Yet somehow it felt different to Pearl, as if the change was not in their surroundings but in themselves. Fall brought new challenges as they prepared for winter. There was hay to cut and store, repairs to make to the buildings, preparations for the cold months ahead. They worked side by side, their partnership strengthened by their time in Cheyenne. Pearl had begun to think of them as a team, united not just by a legal agreement but by genuine respect and friendship. And perhaps, she admitted to herself in the quiet of her room at night, something more. The first snow came early that year, a light dusting in late October that melted by noon but served as a reminder of what was to come. Pearl found herself watching the sky anxiously, knowing that winter on the high plains could be brutal and isolating. We're well prepared, Sam assured her one evening as they sat by the fire in the main house. Better than most. The barn is stocked, the root cellar is full, and we've got enough firewood to last until spring. I know, Pearl sighed. I just can't help worrying. Last winter was so hard with Papa sick, I felt so alone. Sam's hand covered hers where it rested on the arm of her chair. You're not alone now. The simple touch sent warmth coursing through her. When she looked up, Sam was watching her with an expression that made her breath catch. Pearl, he began, his voice husky. These past months, a sudden pounding on the door interrupted whatever he had been about to say. Sam rose quickly, his hand moving instinctively to the gun he kept at his hip. Who's there? He called, positioning himself between Pearl and the door. It's Jeb Parker from the Double Cross, came the muffled reply. Got a message from the boss. Sam relaxed slightly and opened the door to reveal a young cowboy, snow dusting his shoulders. Jeb, what brings you out in this weather? Boss sent me to warn you, Jeb said, stamping his feet to warm them. Thomas Wilson's been making trouble in town, saying you stole his property and his woman. He's been drinking heavy and making threats. Pearl felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold air seeping through the open door. Threats? What kind of threats? Jeb looked uncomfortable. Said he was going to take back what's his one way or another. Boss thought you should know, especially with winter coming on. Might be weeks before anyone could get out here if there's trouble. Sam's expression hardened. Thanks for the warning, Jeb. You're welcome to stay the night if you don't want to ride back in the dark. Jeb shook his head. Much obliged, but I promised the boss I'd be back tonight. Just wanted to make sure you were prepared. After Jeb left, Sam secured the door and turned to find Pearl still sitting by the fire, her face pale. He wouldn't really do anything, would he? She asked, hating the tremor in her voice. Sam sat down across from her. I don't know. Wilson's always been all talk from what I've heard, but it's best to be cautious. I'll sleep in the house tonight just to be safe." "No," Pearl said quickly. "I mean, that's not necessary. I don't want to disrupt our arrangement because of Thomas's foolishness." "It's just a precaution," Sam insisted. "I'll take the sofa. Just until we're sure Wilson isn't planning anything stupid." Pearl wanted to argue further but couldn't deny the comfort of having Sam nearby given the circumstances. Just for tonight, then. But one night turned into 2, then 3, as reports from town continued to include mentions of Thomas's increasingly bitter complaints and threats. Sam took to sleeping on the sofa in the main house, his presence a reassurance that helped Pearl sleep despite her concerns. A week after Jeb's warning, they were awakened in the middle of the night by the sound of breaking glass. Sam was on his feet instantly, gun in hand. "Stay here," he ordered, moving toward the kitchen where the sound had come from. Pearl ignored him, grabbing her father's old shotgun from above the fireplace and following. In the kitchen, they found a rock had been thrown through the window. A note tied around it with string. Sam picked it up, his expression darkening as he read. Without a word, he handed it to Pearl. "This should have been mine, next time I take more than a window." Pearl's hands shook as she set the note on the table. "He's really going to do something, isn't he?" "Looks that way," Sam agreed grimly, "but he won't find us unprepared." They spent the rest of the night taking turns keeping watch, but nothing else happened. In the morning, Sam rode to town to report the incident to the sheriff, returning with supplies to board up the broken window until it could be properly fixed. "Sheriff says he'll have a word with Wilson," Sam reported as he hammered boards into place. "But without proof it was him, there's not much he can do." "We know it was him," Pearl said, handing Sam another nail. "Knowing and proving are different things," Sam pointed out. "For now, we keep our eyes open and don't take any chances." The next few weeks passed in tense vigilance. Sam took to carrying his gun at all times, even around the ranch. Pearl found herself jumping at every unexpected sound. The carefree companionship they had been developing was overshadowed by the constant threat of Thomas's revenge. Then, just as they were beginning to think Thomas's threat might have been empty after all, disaster struck. Pearl woke one morning to the smell of smoke. She ran outside in her nightgown to find the barn engulfed in flames, Sam already working desperately to free the horses and cattle inside. "Get water," he shouted when he saw her, "and wake the hands." Pearl ran to alert the 2 men they'd hired for the winter, then joined the bucket line as they fought to contain the blaze. But the fire had too much of a head start. By dawn, the barn was a smoldering ruin, though thankfully they had managed to save most of the animals. As they surveyed the damage in the cold light of day, Sam's face was grim. "This wasn't an accident. Someone set this fire deliberately." Pearl nodded, too exhausted and heartsick to speak. The barn had contained not just shelter for their animals but also much of their winter feed. Without it, they faced a serious struggle to keep their herd alive through the coming months. "We'll rebuild," Sam said, putting an arm around her shoulders. "We're not beaten yet." Pearl leaned into his strength, allowing herself a moment of vulnerability. What if he comes back? What if next time it's the house or worse? Sam tightened his hold on her. "I won't let that happen, I promise you, Pearl. Whatever it takes, I'll keep you safe." Something in his voice made her look up at him. Despite the soot streaking his face and the weariness in his eyes, there was a determination there that she couldn't help but believe in. "We'll face this together," she said softly, "like we've faced everything else." Sam's gaze dropped to her lips for a brief moment before he stepped back, his arm falling away from her shoulders. "We should get started on salvaging what we can." The fire proved to be a turning point, though not in the way Thomas Wilson might have hoped. Instead of driving them apart or forcing them to abandon the ranch, it brought Pearl and Sam closer together. They worked side by side to rebuild the barn, their shared purpose strengthening the bond between them. Word of the fire spread quickly through the surrounding ranches, and neighbors they had barely known came to their aid. Men arrived with lumber and tools, women brought food, and within 2 weeks, a new barn stood where the old one had burned. It was a testament to the community spirit of the frontier, where survival often depended on helping one another. During this time, Sam moved permanently into the main house, taking the small guest room rather than returning to the foreman's cabin. The pretense was security, but Pearl found herself grateful for his constant presence. Their evenings by the fire became a cherished ritual, a time to talk over the day's work and plan for the future. It was during one such evening, with snow falling softly outside and the fire crackling in the hearth, that Pearl finally acknowledged to herself what she had been feeling for months. She was in love with Samuel Zimmerman not just as a friend or a partner, but as a man. The realization both thrilled and terrified her. "You're quiet tonight," Sam observed. Looking up from the bridle he was mending, Pearl smiled faintly. "Just thinking." "About what?" she hesitated, unsure how to express the tumult of emotions inside her. "About how much has changed since that day in the churchyard, about how different my life might have been if you hadn't come along." Sam set aside his work. "Do you ever regret it, our arrangement, I mean?" "No," Pearl said without hesitation. "Never, do you?" "Not for a second," he replied, his eyes holding hers with an intensity that made her heart race. "Pearl, there's something I've been wanting to tell you." A sudden gust of wind rattled the windows, drawing their attention. Outside, the snow was falling harder, driven by a wind that howled around the corners of the house. "Looks like we're in for a real blizzard," Sam said, moving to the window. "Good thing we got that barn rebuilt when we did." Pearl joined him, watching the white curtain of snow that obscured everything beyond the porch. "Will the animals be all right?" "They should be fine. We got them all inside before the storm hit." Sam's hand came to rest on her shoulder, a casual touch that nonetheless sent warmth spreading through her. "We're well prepared, remember?" Pearl nodded, acutely aware of his closeness. "Yes, we are." They stood like that for a long moment, watching the storm rage outside while safe and warm within. Pearl found herself wondering what Sam had been about to say before the wind interrupted them. Had he felt it too, this growing connection between them? "We should get some rest," Sam said finally, his hand dropping from her shoulder. "Tomorrow will be a long day clearing snow if this keeps up." "Yes, of course," Pearl agreed, trying to hide her disappointment. "Good night, Sam." "Good night, Pearl." As she lay in bed that night, listening to the wind howl around the eaves, Pearl made a decision. Life on the frontier was too uncertain, too precious to waste on fear and hesitation. When the right moment came, she would tell Sam how she felt, regardless of the risk to their partnership. Some things were worth risking everything for. The blizzard lasted 3 days, confining them to the house except for brief excursions to check on the animals. They passed the time with indoor tasks, Pearl mending clothes and planning spring plantings, Sam working on tack repairs and account books. In the evenings, they played cards or read aloud from Pearl's small collection of books, enjoying a rare period of leisure in their usually busy lives. On the morning of the 4th day, they awoke to silence. The storm had finally passed. When Pearl opened the front door, she gasped at the transformation outside. Everything was blanketed in pristine white, the familiar landscape rendered almost unrecognizable by snow that reached past her knees. "It's beautiful," she breathed as Sam came to stand beside her. "It is," he agreed, though when she glanced at him, he was looking at her rather than the snow. They spent the day digging paths to the barn and other outbuildings, checking on their stock and assessing any damage from the storm. By sunset, they were exhausted but satisfied that the ranch had weathered the blizzard with minimal harm. As they sat down to dinner that evening, Sam seemed unusually nervous, fidgeting with his fork and starting conversations only to let them trail off unfinished. "Is something wrong?" Pearl finally asked. "You seem distracted." Sam set down his fork and took a deep breath. "Pearl, there's something I need to say, and I'm not sure how you'll take it." Pearl's heart skipped a beat. "Go on." "When we started this partnership, it was just business." a practical arrangement that benefited us both. He met her gaze across the table. But somewhere along the way it became more than that for me. You became more. Pearl felt her breath catch in her throat. Sam, please let me finish, he said quickly. I know this could complicate things between us. I know you might not feel the same way. But after everything that's happened, the fire, Thomas's threats, I can't keep pretending. Life's too uncertain out here to waste time not saying what matters. He reached across the table to take her hand. I love you, Pearl O'Malley. Not as a business partner or a friend, though you are both those things and I value them highly. I love you as a man loves a woman he wants to spend his life with. Tears sprang to Pearl's eyes, tears of joy and relief and overwhelming emotion. Oh, Sam, I love you too. I have for months now, but I was afraid to say anything, afraid it would ruin what we've built together. Sam's face lit up with a smile so bright it rivaled the lamplight. You do? Truly, Pearl nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Sam rose from his chair and came around the table, kneeling beside her. I don't have much to offer beyond what we already share. I'm not a wealthy man, and this ranch, while promising, is still a gamble. But I can promise you this: I will work every day to make you happy, to build a life with you that's full of love and respect and partnership in every sense of the word. That's all I want, Pearl whispered, reaching out to touch his face. Just you, just us, building something together. Sam caught her hand and pressed a kiss to her palm. Then, Pearl O'Malley, would you do me the honor of becoming my wife, not for convenience or propriety, but because we choose each other above all others for the rest of our days? Yes, Pearl said without hesitation. Yes, with all my heart. Sam stood, pulling her up with him, and then his arms were around her, his lips finding hers in a kiss that felt like coming home after a long journey. It was tender and passionate all at once, a promise and a fulfillment. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Sam rested his forehead against hers. I've wanted to do that for so long, Pearl smiled up at him. What took you so long, Cowboy? Sam laughed, the sound rich with joy. Caution, fear, stupidity, take your pick. Well, Pearl said, her arms still around his neck, you have a lifetime to make up for lost time. I intend to, he murmured, leaning down to kiss her again. Their wedding took place in the spring when the snow had melted and the first wildflowers dotted the prairie. They exchanged vows in the same churchyard where Sam had first found Pearl crying over her father's grave, a symmetry that felt right to both of them. Martha stood as Pearl's witness, beaming with approval, while Sam's friend from the Double Cross, Jim Coleman, stood up for him. The town turned out in force for the ceremony, including many who had helped rebuild their barn after the fire. Even the sheriff attended, bringing news that Thomas Wilson had finally been arrested not for the fire, which they couldn't prove he'd set, but for an attempted robbery at the Clearwater Creek Bank. He would be spending the next several years in prison, removing the shadow that had hung over Pearl and Sam's happiness. After the ceremony, they hosted a celebration at the ranch, now officially renamed Willow Creek. As the sun set on their wedding day, Sam led Pearl away from their guests to the spot by the stream where the willows grew. Happy, Mrs. Zimmerman? He asked, his arms around her waist. Pearl smiled up at him, still getting used to her new name. Happier than I ever thought possible. Me too, Sam said, pressing a kiss to her forehead. When I found you in that churchyard last year, I never imagined we'd end up here. It's funny how life works out, Pearl mused. If my father hadn't died, if Thomas hadn't abandoned me, if you hadn't come along at just the right moment. If, Sam finished with a smile. No point dwelling on what might have been. I prefer to focus on what is and what will be. And what will be, Mr. Zimmerman? Pearl asked, leaning into his embrace. Years of hard work, Sam said honestly. Struggles and setbacks alongside the good times, but also love and partnership and building something that will last beyond us. Maybe children someday if we're blessed, a legacy to pass on. Pearl's heart swelled at the vision he painted. That sounds perfect. It won't always be, Sam cautioned. Life on the frontier never is. No, Pearl agreed, but we'll face whatever comes together, that's what matters." As they walked back to join their guests, hand in hand under the emerging stars, Pearl thought about the journey that had brought them to this moment. From the depths of grief in that churchyard to the heights of joy today, it had been a path neither of them could have foreseen. Sam had offered his hand when she needed it most, leading her not just to a home but to a future filled with possibility. And she had found the courage to take that hand, to trust again when trust seemed foolish, to build a partnership that had blossomed into love. Together, they had faced threats and disasters, hard work and uncertainty. Together, they had created something neither could have achieved alone. And together, they would continue to build their life at Willow Creek, one day at a time, bound by a love that had grown from the most unlikely of beginnings. As the years passed, Willow Creek Ranch flourished under their care. They added to their herd, improved their buildings, and expanded their operations to include horses as well as cattle. The town of Clearwater Creek grew alongside their ranch, the railroad bringing new opportunities and challenges alike. 5 years after their wedding, Pearl gave birth to their first child, a daughter they named Elizabeth after Sam's mother. 2 years later, their son James arrived, named for Pearl's father. As their family grew, so did their dreams for the future. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations, and the changing landscape of the West. There were difficult times when they wondered if they would make it through, but they always did, their partnership stronger for the trials they faced together. On the 10th anniversary of the day Sam had found Pearl crying in the churchyard, they stood together on their front porch, watching their children play in the yard where once there had been only bare earth and uncertainty. "You ever think about how different our lives might have been?" Pearl asked, leaning against her husband's solid frame, Sam's arm tightened around her waist. "Sometimes. But then I look at what we've built, this ranch, our family, our life together, and I can't imagine any other path." Pearl nodded, understanding completely. "It's strange to think that some of the darkest moments of our lives led us here to this happiness." "That's life, I suppose," Sam mused. "You never know which turns in the road will lead you home." Pearl looked up at the man who had once been a stranger offering a helping hand and was now the center of her world. "I'm glad your path crossed mine, Samuel Zimmerman." "So am I, Pearl Zimmerman," he replied, leaning down to kiss her as their children's laughter rang out across the ranch, a sound that embodied all they had worked for, all they had overcome, and all they had become together. And in that moment, Pearl knew with absolute certainty that when Sam had taken her hand that day in the churchyard, he hadn't just led her to a home, he had led her to where she truly belonged.